Aw, happy Valentine's Day. Thanks, Abby and Hannah.
If you haven't seen this week's episode of BattleBots, you missed the announcement of the top 32 bracket. There are plenty of spoilers ahead, so go back and watch it.
This week we talked to Jake Ewert, Jake from State Farm, our favorite green fire breather, Jamison Go from Sawblaze, and someone who even inspires technical T-Rex, Aren Hill from Tantrum.
I'm Will Bales from this thing.
We're Mike and Andrea Galately from Team Whyachi.
I'm Jake from Hydra, and this is...
Till the Tape After Show. Not touching you.
Welcome to the Tale of the Tape After Show. Let's get started with our 30-second recap.
30 seconds on the clock.
Hydra plays that ground game really well. Rusty lasts a full 3 minutes with Sawblaze. Tantrum takes Gamma 9 down piece by piece.
Kenny needs a change of underwear after Endgame launches a piece of shrapnel at the glass. P1 looks so good that even Brandon is visibly impressed. Beta practically hammers Grabbot through the floor. And Valkyrie goes head over heels for Whiplash.
For our first deep dive of the night, let's get started with the Hydra hype train after getting that #1 seed.
Whoop, 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 all aboard!
I'm excited. Hydra is a tour de force. What an amazing mechanism inside. I think it's really cool. It's great to see one of the few truly novel, unique weapons that's come out of the last couple of years.
For sure. I honestly thought Uppercut one big hit from Uppercut after seeing what they've been doing this season could have taken Hydra out completely, but Hydra's able to pull out the win, so.
And we've talked about Hydra before quite a bit on this show, mostly complaining about Jake's villain, let's say. But I think it's really time to talk about the robot. So here's Jake.
Mike, Andrea, I owe you an apology for the overrated comment. So hopefully the shirts that you have might buy myself a little bit of good grace back with you. But either way, I hope to see you next season because I'm sure that rematch is coming. I definitely don't think I was coming into this season going to be the villain. But it was kind of thrust upon me, and according to a lot of people online, I'm not doing a very good job. Apparently I don't have that intimidation factor. But you'll find out this week, Will, I think. Right? Maybe? Well, I sure hope so, because if I lose in that first round with that Whyachi curse again, I might be taken to the woodshed. The brackets are out, and guess what? I made the #1 seed. Highly contested, probably, seeming a lot of threads here and there, but look at it this way. The opponents that I went against were some of the top tier bots there was. Witch Doctor being the #1 coming back from last season, with, Bite Force, of course, being out. And then he had Huge, which is super gangly and a unique bot, and everybody usually has a problem with them. And then Uppercut, which was, going into that fight, the #1 seed as well. I might not have won with knockouts like I did last year, but I think I won fairly convincingly in most things. I don't think I had any split decisions. So there could have been a thing for Bloodsport or Copperhead because they both had great wins as well, and probably more exciting for the most part. As you can see from these two picks, you can tell that the hydraulics take up a massive portion of this bot. Without them in there, there's a lot of airspace inside there, and that's what makes Hydra, relatively big. It's not quite as big as some of the big bots, but it's still bigger than, a compact Copperhead or any of those, Tantrum style super small bots. Let's see a generalized thing of how the hydraulics work. Here's a depiction of it. Down here we have our reservoir, which is where we store our hydraulic fluid. And from there it runs to our pump, which is always circulating and flow. And it comes up to this check valve so that anything that it pressurizes, the pressure stays on the orange side of the cylinder into the accumulators. The accumulators are a piston, so as the pump is actually pumping, this black bar here would start from nothing, and it would pump its way up, and it would keep going, and that actually increases the pressure of the hydraulic fluid and of the air on the backside. We start the air on the backside before a match at 2100 psi, and after we fully push the piston all the way back, then we get up to our 3000 psi, and that would be our preferred flipping pressure. Once we want to flip, we hit one of these or both of these two valves. This one is actually a flow control valve, so if we wanted to, we could send fluid up and around to the other end of the cylinder and run it slow, so we could do a lift, or we can hit both valves at the same time, and this would be the big 120 gallon a minute valve, and we pump that and we let all that fluid flow, and we go into the cylinder, and that actually extends the cylinder, which makes the flip. On the reverse side of that is we can't have this fluid, when we open these valves, go back to tank. That's what was happening last season, is that these two valves were staying open at the same time. So when we introduced our new timer system, we closed this so that it stopped fluid movement. Then we went ahead and opened the big valve so that we could pressurize this side of the cylinder so that it would extend. As this is extending, there's fluid in the rod end of the cylinder that needs to come out. So what we need to do is we need to open up a valve on this side to allow this flow to come back through, back to the accumulator. Otherwise, if we didn't, it'd just be pressure on this side, pressure on that side, and it wouldn't move. Well, it would, because the pressure differential between the two sides, it would extend slightly, but it wouldn't be fast in any way. When we get this finally pumped up full of pressure, we have this pressure sensing rig on here that when it tells it to go to 3000 psi, we open this valve then so that the pump, instead of pushing into the accumulator system anymore, it just cycles back and flows back and forth to the reservoir. If we didn't do this, we'd actually have to shut the pump off, which isn't ideal. We want that pump to be running all the time, so when we need it, it's already up to speed and we can start pumping as soon as the pressure gets low enough to trigger the valve. The age-old comparison of Bronco versus Hydra, pneumatic versus hydraulic. Overall, there's probably not too much of a change. From what I gather between the difference, it's like hitting a baseball compared to throwing it. The hit is jarring, and it hits in the first few inches, and then it doesn't put any more power into it after that. And that would be more like a Bronco or a pneumatic system. Whereas the hydraulics, it's more of a over time comparison. So when we flip up 18 inches with the flipper, we're in contact for almost that whole time. So we're putting more energy into it. So Bronco might actually hit harder to get the same height, because he's got to hit it within a certain amount of distance, compared to where I can flip and I'm usually in contact for longer because the flipper actually increases speed as it goes up, which keeps the bot in contact with the other robot, and which gives us that extra time, and it's all about the time, how much energy you can put into the robot.
On our second deep dive, let's talk to Sawblaze, the Rusty Killer.
Yeah, that's what we thought was going to happen, but Rusty surprised everybody and actually went to 3 minutes with Sawblaze.
Yeah, and Sawblaze actually used his diamond saw for the first time this season, which obviously tried and true method for him, but his hammer saw's been really hurting a lot of people.
Robots.
Probably people too, I would imagine. So let's hear from Jamison what it was like to fight Rusty.
We are not aware of anyone being physically harmed in any capacity by Sawblaze.
A lot of the changes we made to Sawblaze this season versus 2019 was actually motivated by our fight with Witch Doctor. Basically, that fight showed us a lot of different ways that the robot can be messed up, and it exposed some of the, let's say, internal reliability issues as well. So starting off, one of the things that we did, which is kind of like the low-hanging fruit to the design, is to make the chassis just a little bit bigger. It's actually hard to tell because most of that space was added on the underside. But by making the chassis bigger, we're not actually spacing out the components anymore. We added more air gaps, and as people know in fighting robots, air is the best armor. So added more air gaps, which would prevent the spinners, teeth, and things like that from coming up from underneath the robot and start to tickle the electronics. Is actually the reason why we lost that one drive side in our fight versus Witch Doctor. One of the sensor cables was actually tickled by one of their blades after they, basically punctured through the bottom of the base plate and left a massive burr which sliced the cable. Other things that are maybe easier to notice because they're on the outside, we reinforced the plow base. So we really wanted to make sure that stayed stiff enough, was robust enough against a few different hits, that we would be able to maintain that level. Because the forks, our number one strategy is to get underneath people. So if we can't do that, it's basically game over. So you might notice there's, in the bend section at the bottom half, there's actually another flat plate, which goes kind of like, if this is the bend, it sits underneath right here, creating a tubular section, making it very, very strong. So against bending, it would be more resilient. We also have a new fork design. One thing, again, referencing back to the Witch Doctor fight, is when they're hit on the very end, the tips would actually tend to get peeled, or the whole thing would shear off the face. So we went to a design which was a lot more robust. It relied on these thick plates, kind of similar to the Copperhead build, actually, in that there is really thick plates on the bottom that were beveled. The machine is beveled or ground onto the front. And we figured those would be a lot more robust to all the abuse of hitting all the floor seams or running into opponents' weapons. The center fork in particular, once again, our number one strategy being getting underneath people, we wanted that center fork to be serviceable and a lot more compliant. So that center fork, if you look at the very tip of it, actually is two pieces. So there's the main strut, which is the part that comes out from the plow base, and the tip of the fork actually has a pivot. So it is compliant to a certain amount, just following the seams of the floor, but we still have that third point of contact, 3 points of a plane, 2 on the wheels, and the third one is out in the center fork. So, it can get hit a few times, but it should not compromise the stability of the machine, make sure we're always driving correctly. And finally, I think the thing that people are noticing the most, especially for our first knockout against Whiplash, which is a huge deal for us and weapons doing things, is a optimized weapon assembly. In this season, we're swinging something maybe 10 pounds less than the old one. Yeah, 10 pounds less, but a lot less than the old one, and we're still doing plenty of damage. The blade shape is optimized such that we are hitting more with this front tooth. The old videos, we're watching all the replays from the show, is showing that we're basically 50-50 on hitting with these back teeth, which are never supposed to be impact surfaces per se. We want everything to go through this large center tooth. This is our primary puncture surface. So we made this stick out a little bit more. We brought these a little bit in, the end pieces, and adjusted the size of everything so that it was balanced at full speed. And speaking of full speed, we also made sure this thing could go up to 250 miles an hour tip speed. If you make the blade lighter, you need to compensate to get that energy by making it spin faster. So how did we get that? We implemented sensored control with our weapon setup. That allowing us to more reliably spin up faster, basically dropped our spin up time from 20 seconds plus down to maybe 6 or 7. Oh my goodness. That fireball was something else, wasn't it? I'll tell you a little story. Actually, when that fight was going on, I had no idea that happened. My teammates afterwards, especially John Mayo, who is our Flame Master in Chief, he was like, "Wow, did you see that?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "That's gonna make the highlight reel for every single BattleBots promo from here on out." And I was like, I don't know. So we had to wait for the photos to really come in to see what that kind of looked like. And wow, that was pretty big. Everything else on the inside of the robot was actually A-okay. When they uppercut Fun. Through, basically, that's a weak point. That weak point right behind the wheel, between our armor, is like, oh, right in that chink, man. Basically uppercutting straight through that. They slice through the thin section of aluminum in that frame pocket, and they nick the tank. The tank this season, our new flamethrower assembly, for other ease of service and replacement and diagnosis, is everything's mounted to our top plates. Top plates made of titanium. So when they uppercut through there, lifting the assembly, hitting the top plate, creating a spark off the top plate, and also making a slice through the tank. So there's a tiny little hole that just bled gas, and we're propane at a pretty high pressure inside that recycled gas tank. And it ignites off the spark and shoots outwards. And I guess lucky for us is that whole motion of lifting the flamethrower assembly, creating that puncture, which is now outside, mind you, because it's kind of bent up a little bit. Shooting it outside the robot meant that the fireball went completely out. It looked really impressive on screen, but it was nowhere inside the robot. And I think that's probably the best case scenario for us. We do our best job to isolate the flamethrower system. We know how bad it could be if the robot was on fire. So that gas tank is actually as far away as possible from all the critical electronics, which ironically puts that closer to the outside of the robot, which is probably why this happened. It's a 1 in a million thing. We don't usually expect that to happen.
On the third deep dive, we're going to talk about the Tantrum versus Gamma 9 fight.
Yeah, this match was super impressive for Tantrum, and not only did he have great control of the match, but that punching vertical spinner was super effective.
Yeah, it's great to see Tantrum really finally doing the thing. Like he's full on Quagmire with the Giggities, and I'm happy to actually see it do the thing. So let's talk to Aren.
People have noticed Tantrum has so far actually hit some things, so that's one of the biggest things we changed. After the 2019 season, we came away from BattleBots with a weapon spun up, did the punch thing, etc. Just never actually connected with people, which is much more of a geometry thing. A lot of our focuses after that season were expose the disc out the front more so it can actually hit people. And then the other one of the big ones was designing for maintainability, of being able to always make sure the robot goes into a fight at 100%. We had a few matches last year where we didn't quite have the time. That actually led to us making a full-size drive prototype, just purely to test a new drivetrain setup. Learning from that, updating it again. That seems to be paying off so far. I don't know. I feel like it moves around the box pretty well. We also added a self-rater. And then we did actually manage to take good advantage of the extra time due to the filming delays. We had a couple of team members, college kids, home over the summer that were greatly enabling this, Will and James, for getting the robot out and doing practice with it. We just had no weapon in it. We took the drivetrain from last fall that we built, the prototype, and then just sparred in the parking lot. We were lucky enough to have a couple local teams. So during that time, we actually were able to get Hal and Hannah and Duck out to play. So we did some sparring in a parking lot against those two. It was just against Duck. Marvin did not show. Also, Hannah's a better driver than Hal. But Hal declared we did win a unanimous judge's decision between a weaponless Tantrum and Duck with the hammer beak going to town. So I feel pretty good about that one. And it's great to be able to have that level of testing because it just gives you a heck of a lot more confidence in the box. We were actually able to get, it was about 9 hours of actual drive practice on the robot, which is more than our previous two robots saw ever by a factor of at least 10. So felt pretty good going into the season because we actually showed up at the event and I think we were the second robot through safety behind Gigabyte. They live closer and they get up earlier, so that's my excuse. We do get a lot of comments occasionally with regards to the size of Tantrum. I know Zach was on a while ago. Technically, Copperhead is 0.7 inches skinnier. Robot size is kind of hard to determine based on envelope, etc., unless you shrink wrap it and dunk it in water and go by volume. But yes, Tantrum is one of the smallest robots at the event. Coming, I can no longer really say I'm a newcomer to this, but when we did come into it as in season 3 as complete newcomers, we were basically very paranoid and never wanted to pull our robot out of the box in multiple pieces. So that led to smaller, thicker. Like there's a thing called the square cubed rule, where like make something a little bit bigger, volume cubes, all your weight, like everything balloons real fast. So if you can keep your robot small, everything can be a lot thicker. So I've actually got one of Tantrum's armor pieces here. This is about 20 pounds, which isn't actually that much weight compared to what other people spend on armor overall. So we have 2 of these, so it's 40 pounds of armor on the outside of the robot. But if you notice, that's 3/8 thick, and this is the same AR400 air like most people use, but there's a lot of it. And then one of the other unique things we do is mount it all on, those are effectively Jeep suspension bushings. So those are made for having a couple 1,000-pound vehicle bouncing up and down on them as you're running over or whatever. So turns out they're pretty good for having it get hit aggressively and absorbing and letting things move. Zach made the comment for Copperhead, when you make your robot really small, there's no space for anything to move. I think it's one of the larger differences. Tantrum similarly is small, but the entire outer armor set is all shock mounted, and we can take most hits people dish out, which we're pretty happy with how that's been performing so far. When we were looking at the directions to go after season 3 with a flipper that really didn't like itself and wasn't going to ever be as powerful as we wanted it to be, we started talking through some other derivations of things we could do. So we took part tried and true, the part where you spin something and shove it in the other person, and it looks like you're being aggressive and you do some damage. And flippers are nice because you effectively get to have some level of control of when you engage and when you deal with the opponent, but everything ends up being rather big, so your armor is usually not that good, so you usually get eaten by spinners. So in this case, being able to actually pull the weapon back means facing horizontals and the like, it's a lot easier to not have the weapon get damaged by that, because it's back out of the action until you want to engage it. Great on paper, making it deliver and work. We're getting there. Robot's doing all right, so we're really, really happy with how it did in the Gamma 9 fight. There's a couple spinner, like actual motor set, like there's no belts, etc., because we have a hub motor set up, so the motor is actually inside the disc, which is pros and cons. Pros, real durable, no belts, no chains, anything to be sad there, but spin up time is currently a little lacking, and we got to deal with getting wires to a moving thing. I'm showing one close-up here of one of the details with regards to getting, since the motor's inside of there, we need to get the wires to it. So there's a set of wires that comes down around the side, and then comes to these 3 bands. We refer to it as the rolling loop. And then there's a chain on either side that's actually attached to the carriage to be able to slide it. So keeping those wires happy and not killing anything, etc., that's one of the more difficult parts here. And then also keeping this sliding rail assembly happy and freely moving is also a big important part. And also it's enabled some fun stuff with regards to like popping people on top of us and landing hits on the bottom of them. And then it also lets us do things like pin somebody, spin up the weapon, engage, get a hit, and leave, as opposed to having to back off, let it spin up, and dive in again. Couple of fun stories. So I work at, well, technically Johnson & Johnson Ethicon now, but Oris Health was company name. So you see Oris on the side of the robot. It's my employer. They've been really supportive of this. I've got 4 or 5 team members that are also coworkers, and there are some team members that are not, so we're not entirely Oris based. From a company perspective, they've put a lot of emphasis on hiring people to do this type of stuff for fun. And turns out when you get a whole bunch of people who, for fun, go and build robots, either for BattleBots or other robotics competitions, you end up with a whole lot of passionate people, and that results in some real cool stuff. So similar to Victor, I work on surgical robots. I can't show mine off yet, NDAs and such, and it's not too public. It's cooler than Victor's, I have to say, but I'll leave it at that.
I have to thank Chris for this week's Chris Roast of the Night, because he dished a little bit back to Endgame after our fight.
Well, if you were shooting it for the judges, your accuracy sucks, pal, because you ended up being about 25 feet away from those, and you scared the you-know-what out of Florian. And just to let you know...
It's not easy to do.
He is a former mixed martial artist sort of guy, so if you think the robots are scary, do not tick off this dude.
Now it's time for this week's fan question.
Hey everybody, it's Luke with Behind the Bots with this week's top fan question, sent in by Corey Schweinhardt, who asks, why do some bots use weapon belts versus weapon chains? What are the pros and cons of each? Great question, Corey.
Well, Hypershock has actually used belts and chains for its weapon, right?
Yeah, we've actually used quite a few of them. We've used V-belts, serpentine belts, chains. They all have their own...
Hold on a second. Do you feel like you're qualified to answer this question?
I've used V-belts, serpentine belts,
but you know who's
chains.
more qualified, right? Technical T-Rex.
Technical T-Rex, technical T-Rex. The T in T-Rex stands for technical.
When choosing how to transfer power to their spinning weapons, teams typically are split between belts and chains. Each has their own merits, but every team has to choose a solution to meet their needs. You've probably already seen chains used in your everyday life, such as in a bicycle or a motorcycle. Chains are a very efficient way to transfer high power. As a result, chain drive is a common solution for very high power weapons like Tombstone and Bite Force. However, chains run the risk of transferring shock forces from weapon hits through the chain and into the bot. Many teams using chain also incorporate a clutch to prevent these shock loads from permanently damaging the motor. And, because it is made of links, each comprising of several small components, chain is also susceptible to single-point failures. Lastly, chain is the heavier of the two options, limiting the weight you can put elsewhere in the bot. The majority of BattleBot's competitors with spinning weapons use belts, most commonly V-belts. Made of rubber and of fiber reinforcement such as nylon or Kevlar, V-belts are the cheapest option and are most tolerant of misalignment of the motor shaft and weapon shaft. The V shape of the belt rides in a groove in a pulley and, when designed properly, cannot slip off. The belt also tends to wedge further into the groove as the load increases. The greater the load, the greater the wedging action, which further improves the torque transmission. Some teams, however, go for a loose fit on their belts so the motor can slip during heavy hits, much like the clutch used with chains. They also have the weight advantage compared to chain, weighing a small fraction than that of the same length chain drive. V-belts still have issues. Some teams have a great difficulty finding the right tension to run their weapon. In addition, there's more mechanical loss from belts. The friction of the belt on the pulley and the force required to bend the belt can be enough to cause issues for some more finicky brushless motors. Lastly, teams who use V-belts have several together, and making sure they all have the same tension and length can prove challenging. Whatever the choice, bots have used both chains and belts with great success. As long as you design your system properly, either can spin your weapon to victory.
For tonight's Thing of the Week, we have... Shop Tour of the Week. That's a cool one.
That's a new one.
I like that.
Well, Whyachi makes parts for everybody. Most teams have Whyachi switches in them. So can we go... Yeah, I mean, we do. Can we go tour their shop?
Team Whyachi has been doing this bot thing since it won its first Giant Nut in '01. And since then, we've been making a lot of parts for other robots. We make a lot of custom parts that they send us. We have a water jet and other machines. And we do a lot of standardized products like gearboxes and switches. So I think it's about time that we show people kind of where the magic happens. So why don't you come with me and we'll take a tour of the shop. Welcome back, guys. Let's take a travel through the shop here and see what's going on. So over here we have our relatively new CNC lathe. We do a lot of round parts. We did a lot of the shafts this week with the wedgelets for the flipper. We had to do all that machine so it fits through the tie rods correctly. And then we walk our way back in here. We're actually starting on the new sections of blocks, the new hydraulic blocks. So we're already thinking about next season, so hopefully we can get that going. Back in the corner here, we have our CNC 2.5 axis milling machine. It gets almost all the things done that we can, for the most part at least. Anything we can't do in there, we usually do with the water jet, which will be coming up later in the show. We have these regular mills for doing a few options. And then when we walk over here, we have our manual lathe, which we used to do a lot of parts on, and now we kind of automated the process on the CNC lathe. Walking back a little bit further, we have this 110 ton press. We do a lot of different stuff. Actually, the Hydra frame we had to do in here because we didn't have enough tonnage on our other press to do certain things and operations on. So we make special dies, special bottom dies, and then we just hammer press them in, and it's all done by hand. There's no automation there whatsoever. We have what we actually make ourselves is this quad belt. I don't think we've ever sold one of these actually, but we did make it, so that was kind of cool. For all of our rolling applications, we have this really old roller, and when we're coming out here, this is our press. We do a lot of work in here with titanium, AR500. We have a bunch of other things that we can do while we're doing that. For welding, we have an acorn table with clamps galore. That way we can make sure the parts are fixtured, held down properly. It's a little messy right now, but for the most part, we can do 10-foot sections fairly easily. If we have to go bigger, we actually have to set it back on the floor to get all the welding done. And then the piece de resistance is the water jet. Right now, we have no idea how we'd make half the parts anymore if we didn't have this water jet.
So normally I'd say that's the end of the show right there, but there's a little bit more housekeeping we have to do. They announced who's in the tournament in this episode, so we know the top 32.
And huge relief that both of our teams got in because we were sweating it this season for sure.
Yeah, we didn't exactly have the records that we were all hoping for. You guys had issues, we had issues. A lot of teams didn't do as well in the fight cards as you'd think. Rotator, another good example. They had what I thought were great fights, but the ranking and the score didn't really match what I saw. So it was a hard one, clearly, to address from the ranking and seeding perspective.
Yeah, and the fact there's only 3 fights for each team, maximum. Not every team even got 3 fights, right? So the fact there's only 3 fights really was tough to distinguish really great teams from teams that started off having some issues like us, and overrated teams maybe, you know.
Oh, and there's other teams that really started to hit their stride. Like P1 had the best fight of their season, best fight of their career, I think, this evening, which, you know, going forward could have been really great and really set them up for like a normal top 32 or a top 16 position. But because there's limited fight night fights and just everything was kind of weird this year, they just didn't make the cut.
Yeah, and I think all of this is going to make for a really unpredictable bracket because you have robots like, Witch Doctor, Tombstone, Rotator in the bottom half of the bracket, and you have some newcomers that have surprised everybody in the top half of the bracket. So we really don't know what to expect going forward.
So everybody strap in. Our show's probably going to change a little bit. Our format's going to be slightly different going into these tournament fights, but we're going to be here. We'll keep doing a Tale of the Tape, and we'll see you soon. And until then, happy Valentine's Day. And watch these dead robots, one of which is totally not mine.
I'm Jake from P1. Oh, man. I'm on the wrong team. Let's try this again. I'm Jake from Bite Force. Oh, that still doesn't quite feel right. Let's try this one more time. What do we say? I'm Jake from Hydra. Much better.
Hey, I'm walking here.
I'm about to do a bit here. All right.
For tonight's... Can I get a lump face?
Yeah.
I felt it. I felt the face.
Give me a warning.
I'm going to throw this one back to you, Will. What do you think? How's our match going to go? We already did one once, and you kind of threw yourself out of the arena. Do you think it'll be any different this time?